Okay, yeah, off you go with your story, Jen.
So I was working out of a country in Africa, and I was blown away with an initiative that one of my customers had introduced, and he was very proud of the initiative. And the initiative was as simple as working from heights. He had sent a bunch of people on a course to learn how to work from heights only the week prior. And I get to the operation and I'm working out of an office that was overlooking the area where trucks get loaded and unloaded. And as we were looking down, it was just in a break. We weren't observing their work per se. And all of a sudden he says, "Oh my gosh, Jenny, there are people here working at heights and they're not following process." Because what we had was a bunch of very proud workers with a glossy harness, a beautiful harness, brand new, shiny. It wasn't dirty yet, wasn't tattered, but they weren't tethered to anything. And he said, "Oh, I need to go and tell them off." And I said, "Hang on, let's have another look." And then we saw another worker doing exactly the same thing, and then another worker doing exactly the same thing. And he looked at me and turned white. And he said, "Jenny, this is very embarrassing." And the issue was that the workers were wearing their harnesses, but there was nowhere that they could actually tether this thing off. So if they did fall, there was nowhere, there was nowhere to go. And I remember retelling that story to my manager at the time, and he said, "See, this is good, Jenny. This is why they need you here. These people are taking risks where they really shouldn't be taking risks." And I remember saying to my manager, "Well, I'm not sure about that, because on the way to the facility, we passed by, I'll call it accommodation, that people were living in. And the accommodation was probably the size of my desk times 2, so not very big. And that accommodation was being guarded by someone's child while mum and dad had gone to work to earn for the family. And this child was guarding the accommodation either with a fairly large knife, a machete that was about as tall as them, or what was even more confronting for someone like me, a string of bullets hanging across their body and them holding a gun. And I said to my manager, the average age for someone, the average lifespan for someone in that particular country is 45, if they're lucky. So I said to my manager, who had just turned 45 at the time, and I said to him, "Do you think you would live your life differently knowing that this might be your last year of life compared to our environment where people might live to 85, 90 if they're blessed that way?" And he said, "Well, yes." And I said, "So would that change the way you see risk? Because right now, someone falling off the back of the truck that might only be 1.5 meters off the ground is not the worst case scenario for them at all. Not being able to feed their family and having to protect their family by using one of their youngest children. Life's a bit different. Risk awareness, risk tolerance, call it what you like, is different across the globe. And as you were saying, what might feel appropriate in some of our Western countries doesn't always apply in the same way in other countries. Context is everything. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And what a beautiful story. And maybe this is a good place to begin to say, welcome to embracing differences. And uh,
Yeah.
instead of starting off with that, typical ritual of introducing people and boosting egos around it,
Yeah.
I'm joined by Jenny Krasny, a good friend who I met through Rob, studying social psychology of
Mhm.
risk. Jenny, what a beautiful story. And Maybe a few words about yourself, and then we will dive a little bit deeper into this story.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, by background, I am a registered organizational psychologist. So for me, my interest is very much how do I go into a work environment with the goal of not only introducing greater productivity or efficiency, but also how do I do that with people in mind? In an environment we find ourselves today in that is surrounded with automation, AI, digitization, everything feels a little bit more removed, and sometimes we forget about the person in the process. So my interest in life is giving people a voice and letting people be seen. That has been something I've been doing ever since I can remember. I come from the first generation of my family who migrated to Australia. And I know what it's like, and I know my story is not everyone's story, but I know what it's like to be the person who sits in the playground by myself, being the person that someone will point at and laugh at because I was different. I didn't fit into the norm. And it reminded me of a story that I remember at one organization I visited, someone had approached the person I was talking to and handed in their resignation. And that particular individual was shocked that this individual hand in their resignation. And I remember very profoundly, the individual said, for 35 years, I gave you my hands, my head, and my heart. And for 35 years, you took my hands. You had no interest in my head or my heart, what I knew and what I believed. And I remember that story as if I was hearing it again just today. It gave me goosebumps, but it certainly brought me back to when I was a child and witnessing people who were different not being included in a conversation because for some reason what they believe and what they feel was not something people were willing to entertain. So that's very much what I'm interested in, is how do I bring the voiceless to the table? How do I bring the invisible into the visible landscape and have those various views and opinions heard, recognized, and embraced? That's what I'm about.
It's the first time after so many months, maybe years, that I'm hearing something so authentic, so spontaneous, so original. Wonderful, just wonderful, yes. Um, and Jenny, how do you? Let's go a little bit into this and see how do you do that? Because uh, I think it's difficult. I
You
talk
know,
from my lived experiences.
yeah, it's a fascinating question. Because sometimes things like this come somewhat naturally. I don't really have a method. I'd love to tell you that I follow a 4-step process, or I adhere to some Venn diagram or some triangle, or I don't. I don't. I simply sit with an individual and listen, and I create space for them just to express themselves. And when they hesitate, I ask further questions, or I hold space for that hesitation to either emerge or clear itself up. And I just sit. I take an interest in what that individual has to say. And sometimes in doing so, I might share some of my story. But again, I recognize that my story is not everyone's story, but sometimes by offering a little bit of yourself or myself, I realize I get more from another individual than otherwise I might. So it is very much just about holding space for people and giving them the place and the voice where otherwise they don't get it. For me, it's that simple, Nitin. I don't know that I have a formula.
Well, if you did, we would probably be having a very different conversation then. You're so right. I just something very fresh on my mind right now is why my son is 10 years old and he asked the question that, Dad, why is the plasters, some people call them the Band-Aid, and
Yeah.
why are the plasters white in color?
Uh-huh.
And I was shocked and just completely taken aback by it. And I went online to see if there are plasters of other colors. And I found something on Amazon,
Mhm.
Etsy, a couple of websites. And I brought him in and said, Nihal, come, I'll show you. There are some very nice plasters here of different
Yeah.
colors: red, yellow, orange, green, purple, whatever you like. And he was happy, he left.
Yeah.
The next day, I had a conversation with a very good friend of mine, and I said, Tanya, look, I this is the conversation I had with my son, and she's a safety manager in one of the
Mm.
companies, and she said, Nipin, don't tell me anything. She said, I tried to introduce colored plasters in our first aid boxes, and I was told off by one of the um, employees to say this is racist. I was like, what? Um, and funny enough, Jenny, maybe about a week later, I was talking to my mother-in-law, my best friend in this world,
Mm.
and we were having a conversation, and she had a plaster on her forehead, and I could not unsee it, and I had to ask the question. I said, Mom, why is it that this plaster, of course, we speak our native language. I said,
Yeah.
why is the plaster white? Why is it not of any other color? She said, don't you know why? I said, no. She's so annoyed with me. And you've done a PhD and you don't know these things, because she always pulls me on that. And I said, no, I don't. She said, because, I said, what? Because when it gets dirty, you know when it's dirty and you can peel it off and you can throw it away. And I said, how nice. I said, I
I
have a
love
very
that.
scientific answer, isn't it? Isn't it? So, so that's metaphors we live by. One of the first books we read in
Really.
social psychology of risk.
Very much so. I love that. Oh, I love that. And I also just love the various perspectives people bring. And I have to say, when I was a child growing up, the honesty of children hurt because in many ways they were directed at me. But, now that I'm older and I've had my own children, I do like to pursue that childlike curiosity and that childlike observation. The fact that, I still remember when my little boy, when he was little, um, I just saw the same world in such a different lens, like the fascination with a leaf and the shape of the leaf and the feeling of the veins that run through the leaf. And I thought, wow, that thing that I've just become completely blind to suddenly is alive and living in a very different way. And just like your son sees this thing that over time you and I just accept that, well, I guess that's the way it is. And someone that just allows you to see the world in another way and say, wow, actually, yeah, there's more to this than meets the eye.
And the interesting thing is, I just look at myself and see I'm trying to prove him wrong by saying that there are many other colors. The world doesn't work that way. So very, very, yeah, it's it's very interesting because at that stage, and maybe this also ties into our previous conversation, that you're not bounded by any kind of attributions. You're not bounded by making those strong causations between white
Mm.
and plaster. The
Mm-hmm.
plaster has to be white, and then reinforced by white ambulances and white healthcare systems and white everything is pure
Yeah.
because it's white, and everything is bad because it's black. I think
Mm-hmm.
you don't have those causal connections still. And
That's
how
right.
interesting to look at things from a child's perspective. I was fascinated by a chaplain, a friend of mine who lives in Aberdeen, and he says that whenever there is an accident, um, I go on board the ship and I ask a completely different set of questions, and I come up with the best possible responses. But I'm never invited into shipping company. I said, because you don't fit into that causal connection.
Oh, yes.
Um, but it's so interesting. And I always say that to people, that you have an accident, send a chaplain, send somebody who, send an innocent child, because they're not bounded by those
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
biases.
They're not. And they're also not bound or tainted or influenced, if I try and find a more positive spin on it, on a method. on a method. I remember distinctly the same organization actually where I had someone, I was visiting and someone had resigned and, made the comment of, for 35 years, I gave you my hands, my heart, and my head. And for 35 years, you took my hands and didn't think and care about what I had to say or what I had to feel. And I was going somewhere with that point, Nippon, and I've totally forgotten what I was going to say. Remind me what we were saying.
Well, we were discussing the leap between see it and say it. You see
Oh,
something, but how difficult it is to put it into words. Um, and I think the conversation then went in the direction of your story that you just
hmm.
shared in the beginning. Um,
I promise you there was a profound story I wanted to share, and I've just totally forgotten it.
that's fine.
Now,
It's fine. It's fine. We'll come back to it. At
about
some
being in the
stage, it will
moment.
come back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly, exactly. Yeah, and I find it so fascinating that um, the industry pays so little attention to
Mm.
intelligibility, for example. How do you find words? How do you even find words to express what you want to say? Um, it's hard. You want to say something?
No, you certainly make me think about many, many years ago. One of my challenges I have, Nippon, is that I'm described as an empath. And what that means for me, at least, is even before I've come into a room, I can feel the energy of the room. I can connect with the energy of another individual, and I ride the roller coaster of the individual. And certainly in the jobs that you and I have, we spend a lot of time in conversation. Then when you put the whole emotional piece into the picture, not that I try and put it there, it just comes. Um, the net effect is, as that individual rides their emotional roller coaster, so do I. And I can walk away from a conversation both enlightened and buoyed, and at the same time exhausted because I've been on that ride. And I remember it led me to need to see a psychologist. And I'd never seen a psychologist for my own reasons before. And I remember I was put through a process of cognitive behavioral therapy. And as we did the work, or as I did the work, all of a sudden I was struck with a dilemma, because now we were getting into, let's identify where that thought pattern maybe began. Well, it makes sense from cognitive behavioral therapy that you need the thought pattern in order to then challenge it and find alternative, responses to it. But what happens when some of the ways that we work and I work actually occurred before I had language? And to try and manufacture a language so then I can apply a therapeutical technique to it wasn't quite hitting the mark. No amount of words at the time, in my now grown up state, in my adult language, could even come close to what was going on for me before I had speech. And so you're right. Sometimes accurately being able to convey how you feel and what's going on in a way that is meaningful, particularly to the audience you're trying to address, can be challenging.
You know, many years ago, I was doing an exercise on framing questions and how do you frame questions. In social psychology of risk, we call it workspace, headspace, and group space.
Mm.
You give people a situation and you say, what questions would you ask from this situation? And people will typically give you an answer in one of those three categories. And as I was leaving the workshop, there was this one particular man. He said that, Nipin, I think I don't know what you do, but you need to figure out what you do because I have done it many times, but I can't get people to talk. I just
Oh,
can't. And they said there's something there that you need to figure out and document it and put it across, and that would be, you would spend your lifetime doing this work. Then it'll be awesome for you to do that. Uh, and I just thought about it, and I came back home and thought, how do I, how do I, how do I even make sense of any of this to say, or how do I help this person understand that what is it that makes people, brings people together and have a
mm,
conversation? Um, there is so much that happens even before you start a conversation. There is so much in that space, that resonance. There is no technique to it. I have had situations where there are people sitting 5,000 miles away from me, and first eye contact, and they want to share everything
yeah.
about their lives. Um, what is the recipe for that? I don't know.
Mm, mm,
It's such a, there are all sort of constructs these days, psychological safety, just culture, reporting culture, but so little time is spent on understanding exactly what you said. And how do people even create that trust between themselves? When do they actually decide that I want to give you the language of my soul or
hmm.
my, right?
Yeah,
There isn't a recipe for that, and I'm sure there are people who are trying to make recipes of this and making a fortune out of it. I
yeah.
don't have a problem with that, but what a what a um, what a thing that you have to give me a recipe for how do you get to the language of the soul or the
Mm,
spirit. There is none. What do
mm.
you think? What do you think, Jen?
Oh, I think I totally, totally agree. As you were sharing, my mind was also racing to various examples where, yeah, to try and put a label on or a process to what that is. I don't know. Like you, I've always had this challenge. Sometimes it's a gift and sometimes it's not. Uh, and that is, for some reason, people will just come and lean on my shoulder and tell me their life story. They just do. I don't invite it consciously, that I know, but I obviously create some vibration, some aura, some atmosphere. I don't know what you call it, that signals that here's someone who will just hear you out and take you for who you are and not make a judgment call about you, but just hear out your story.
At 3 or 4 years of age, um, my daughter is told she's like me, a brown skinned girl. Well, brown is another word. We should talk about that. But she tells me um, that dad, at 14, after 10 years of this experience, she's sitting in the graveyard with me, and we are having a
Mm,
conversation between us. He said, "Daddy, there was this girl in the class, 4 years old, and we used to hold hand and walk together." And she said, um, I would never want to hold her hand. And I said, why? Because it's the same girl who would publicly call me stinky girl. So you stink. And you stink, and your food stinks, and you don't know how to
mm,
eat because you don't eat with a fork and knife. And I kept hearing these stories from my children. And it took her 10 years to find words and,
mm,
and actually find the courage to say this to me. There are two aspects to it. One is that she's found the words. The second is that she actually believes that somebody will believe her when she
mm,
says this.
mm-hmm.
And what's interesting in all of this is that if you now take this to the workplace, Jenny, and you think about all those people who are doing all the improvisation in the world. They're applying a certain torque to the machinery. They're
Mm-hmm.
greasing in certain parts. They're moving around in a certain space in ways that they shouldn't move, and coming to now explain the language of intuition to somebody who
Oh,
only understands process, who only understands KPI, who only understands rules. And I think we have a problem
mm,
with stupidity of words like just culture. because one, that language is not intelligible, it cannot be put into words. Two, you're talking to somebody from another subculture
Yeah.
who dances to a completely different tune. So there is no
Hmm.
dance between two people, there's no resonance.
Yeah.
And in the end, the one who is more powerful will always prevail. And I think that's fascinating to think from what we are
Mm.
talking. I know I've took the discussion to the work, but it's a thought that keeps bothering me all the time to say, it's not just children, it's people from another
Yeah.
culture, people who are one layer below us, and we say that very proudly, frontline people, sharp end people, those people
Mhm.
down there. But how do they first of all find a language to communicate what they actually do? And would you actually believe them for what
Mm.
they say?
Well, yeah. And, I wonder if part of the formula you and I have, without it being a formula, is that the only agenda that we have is to listen, to discover, to learn, to understand. Whereas maybe the agenda of people in organizations, that's not the agenda. The agenda might be to meet a preconceived idea or to listen to fill in a box without really listening to understand. I think the first time my eyes were really opened in another way, because even in my family, we weren't incredibly well-to-do. No job was too beneath us, and yet even in a not well-to-do family, there is still a pecking order of society. It's interesting, but And I remember one of my first roles was working in a manufacturing company that made cans, of which our tomatoes and our baked beans go into food cans. And I wanted, in the role that I was doing, I wanted to understand how the business worked, but also the roles that people had, so then I could advise accordingly. And I remember saying to the customer contact, I'd like to be on the shop floor. I'd like to see the process, and I'd like to meet the people who do that process. And I remember her saying, Jenny, this is their job description. What more do you need to know? And I said, well, I can read, but I want to experience it, because I don't know what it's like over in your part of the world, Nitin, but I'm pretty sure it's common whereby I haven't met one person whose job description is an exact replica of what they do every day. It's not. So I wanted to understand. Let's see how this job description comes to life. And she said, Jenny, it's not much. They don't do that much. I mean, these are uneducated people, Jenny. Don't expect very much. And I spent 6 hours, so half a shift, on the floor with various people as they conducted their various parts of the process. And I was most touched by an individual towards the end of the process. And this individual would look at the quality of the cans coming through. And with the most seasoned eye, like a hawk eye, the ability for him to be able to see from a distance that can is imperfect. And he could pick it out, and he would hold the can with quite a lot of love and say, oh, you know what, we can just fix this one and put it back on the line. The interest, the affection, the connection he had with a can, gosh, it put that role into such a new light for me. This wasn't just a quality assurance person. This was someone who had some affinity and pride in the work that they did. And even today, I'll go through the supermarkets and stand in the aisle with all these cans, that I can't help but think of that individual and think of the many individuals who do that work. But I went to listen, I went to understand, I went to appreciate. I didn't go with any more than that as the agenda. And maybe that's the difference, Nitin, that
Yes, yeah,
we're here
yeah,
to
yeah.
listen. Mm.
Yeah, and going back to what we were discussing earlier, that we have a problem in today's world where there are at least three sides to, and we should build on this in the next podcast that we do. There are three sides to every organization. There is the display side of the organization that wants to do certain things because there's an expectation from the shareholders, from the investors, and there are multiple and competing expectations. And it's
Mm.
not simple to come out and do something that would please everyone. And the easiest way to appeal to everyone is to be very aesthetic, be very
Mm.
aesthetic in what you do. So this is the side of the organization that does a wonderful job in that space. Looking good, let's call it looking
Mhm.
good. I just want to be looking good. Very aesthetic values. We quickly figure out that when we come to the line management and the middle management of the organization, that none of this is real. None of this is real. We have to put on this show, but none of this is real. The reality is production. Sorry,
Mm.
the reality is efficiency, not production. The reality is efficiency. We must be efficient and we must be able to measure each and everything. So that display side of the organization, the
Mm.
reception of the organization slowly starts to decouple because the lies that they tell themselves, and they keep telling those lies until everyone around them starts to believe that this is reality, and they maintain that persona so beautifully well. But then comes the side that has to deliver results and
Yeah.
financial the profits and the revenues and so on. They know, we have to stick to this bureaucracy. The god in that part of the organization is efficiency, KPIs, and so
Mm.
on. Um, and then comes so that's the formal side of the organization, sitting in between, and totally decoupled with the top. And when people talk about senior executive, senior leadership doesn't listen. Senior leadership, I think it's many ways, they have no interest in any of that. A lot of them.
Yeah.
Their goals are very different. The bureaucratic side or the efficient side actually has created such constraints that it's now caught up in this narrative that everything has to be measured. If not, it simply does not exist, and it
Mm.
it, it works to that kind of um, worldview. And then comes the informal side of the organization, which is what we are talking about here.
Yeah.
The the god in that part of the organization is production. Is we have to just produce at whatever cost. You give us a rule, and whether it is working for or against us, or even causing accidents, we still have to keep going. The show must go on, kind of
Yeah.
a slogan.
Mm.
And so I think the real struggle is I just don't think that the senior executives and the management even has an interest in this kind of a conversation. But the real struggle is between people who are caught up in this efficiency narrative, which Rob calls technique,
Yeah.
Jacques Ellul's kind of work. And then the opposite side, which sits and actually does all the stuff, keeps things going, but has no language to explain any of
Mm.
this.
Mm.
And I think this is the thing that you left me wondering last time when you tell the story, that when stuff happens, when things go wrong,
Mm.
how do you then find the language to actually put it across to somebody? First of all, you find the right words for it that don't exist for whatever
Yeah.
you do to run the show.
Mm.
Um, and then the second part is that who would believe you anyway? And I think this is a conversation that needs to be um, needs to be needs to be had in workplaces. Say, and coming back to what you were saying, this kind of a conversation is only possible, and the initiative must come from the powerful one, which is the formal side of the organization. Say, I actually want to go and listen.
Mhm.
Until you have this ability, this unique ability to listen without putting your own meaning to it, and let the story go wherever it has to go or wants to go, regardless of whether it ends at the workers, within the confines of work or outside of it, maybe some family trouble,
Mm.
uh, whatever. I think many of us are afraid of that conversation, the nature of the conversation. I think maybe, and I'm speaking to, I'm realizing this, maybe the trouble lies in the lost art of a conversation, that we do not even know what a conversation means. Worse still, technology today has changed the meaning of conversation completely.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's another conversation. But
Oh my
I
gosh, so
think,
many.
isn't it? But I think maybe the lost art of conversation should be our next podcast.
Mm,
Um,
I
it would be
like
such
that.
a wonderful thing to say that let's explore between the two of us to say, what is it that we have learned through our lives that maybe we can share between us and with others? That what exactly is a conversation? What does it take to have a conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh, I
What
really
do you
like that.
think?
I really,
What
really
do you,
like that. You know what was ironic in what you've just said is when I was completing my master's qualification, um, and I had to obviously do a research piece, and I was doing a literature review, and I was drawn to this. I'm old enough that most of the resources I was using were actually physical books, not, nothing on the internet. And I remember being drawn to this book in the library, and it was a book that had this beautiful old smell to it. The cover of the book was this material cover. It was sewn together to the pages of the book. Like it just had something about it. I drew this book out and I opened this book randomly, and there was a line in it. And this book was written in the 1880 something. I cannot remember. I'm not that good at detail, but I remember it was in the 1880 something. And this line that jumped out at me was along the lines of the greatest difficulty, challenge facing organizations today is communication. That was in the 1880s, right? Someone made that observation, and I thought, boy, you could take that out of that book and stick it into any publication today, and it still holds true. And in some cases, it's even worse, as you say. We are now of a generation that we, in theory, are more connected than we have ever been, and in some ways, we couldn't be more disconnected from each other as people. So yeah, I think it would be a wonderful conversation to have in continuing sessions.
I think so. I think so. Well, I think this may be is there anything else you want to say before we stop then?
I just wanted to fill in the blanks for anyone who might be listening as to when you said it had you thinking from our last conversation. And so what prompted that conversation was I was telling Nippon about one of my many customer adventures. And I remember the marketing team had approached me very proudly with a new campaign that they had launched in the name of safety, of course. And they reveal this slogan. And the slogan is something that we've all seen before. For those of us who travel a lot, you would have seen it. For those of us who maybe work with a legal department, we would have seen it. And it was 4 simple words, all beautifully starting with the same letter. It looks wonderful for marketing campaigns, and it was called See Something, Say Something. And this team was just delighted and overjoyed and willing to share it with me. And I said, it's beautiful. And they say, what do you mean? I said, well, it's beautiful from a marketing perspective. This goes back to the perspective taking that we were sharing earlier. I said, from a marketing perspective, it's neat, it's catchy, it resonates. On the surface, it makes a lot of sense. It's very logical. It looks lovely on a poster, on a T-shirt, on a cup. It looks great. It's memorable. It's wonderful. They said, Jenny, you're cynical. I went, well, that's also my degree. I have a master's in cynicism, or specifically in cynicism towards organizational change, but master's in cynicism, I'll take it. So they said, well, what's the cynicism? I said, well, you do realize that the statements see something and say something as simple as they are to say, the reality is quite different. The fact that you and I can see the same landscape, and we will see different things. We just will. And so how do I then know if what I'm seeing is what I should be seeing and you're seeing what you should be seeing, in order to say something about it, to bring it up, to raise my attention? And then if in fact I am seeing something worth raising attention to, yes, I might move my mouth all day. I might get paid to even do that, move my mouth and make some noise and something comes out. But actually saying something is far more difficult than we give credit for. One, have I got the right words? Am I going to put it in the right order or formulation that people need to hear? Is it going to resonate in the way that I need it to land? If I say something, am I even the person to be saying it? Is the person that I'm raising it to someone who even is interested? And if they are interested, are they going to take it with the trust and the credibility I want them to, or are they going to mock me for it? Or are they going to forever bring it up publicly and make a joke out of me because I raised something that really isn't a big deal? So that's what prompted the comment that, for those of you listening, heard Nitin say, this beautiful slogan, see something, say something, beautiful, powerful, but the depth
So,
and the meaning of
yeah,
it is lost on people.
and I'd like to leave the listeners with this question. Say, what does it take to go from see something to say something?
Yeah.
Think about it.